John here with you from ImmunAde. I'm the developer of ImmunAde, and probably about, really now it's been about 26 years ago, my background is animal agriculture, and so was at that time my primary customers were nutritionists in the feed industry, and you think about animals that we use for food. The nutrition they get is pretty amazing, and so what happens is we have nutritionists, and I'm in Canada. My territory for the products I was selling were Western Canada, and as a matter of fact, you might notice that I'm working out right now. I'm sitting on a Peloton bike, which I think is not a bad way to get some exercise, and actually at the same time do a little broadcast about our ImmunAde product. But anyway, going back in 1987, I bought a business from my father that was distributing these animal agriculture products to the animal feed industry in primarily Western Canada. And my customers were the nutritionists that were working for these feed companies that were feeding the animals, the pigs, chickens, and cows, those types of things. Anyway, so my job was to basically call on these nutritionists, and really what it was traveling, from where I live in Winnipeg, as far east as Thunder Bay, Ontario, and then as far west as Vancouver Island. And I did that by car for a bunch of years. Eventually decided I'd become a pilot and start doing it, bought a little airplane and did it that way. But anyway, one of the things that the industry did was they had a what they call a nutrition conference that would be where they bring all the nutritionists into a certain location, and that would be they'd move it around from 3 different provinces in Western Canada, and so it was a great place for me, from my point of view. Instead of me having to go out and see everybody at their different locations, they were all brought into one spot, and so I could meet with them there. And one of the things they do at these conferences is they bring in speakers that have doing some research on on animal health and animal nutrition and that type of things that that are relevant to the industry. And so it would be a great way for me to get all my customers in one place and actually learn something at some of these meetings. And so in 1997, one of the speakers at one of these meetings was talking about the technology that we eventually got involved with, and what that basically was using the immune system of a laying hen to produce antibodies. And we're all now familiar with the word antibodies because of COVID. We've certainly heard that word bandied around many times, but the logic of the technology that they were proposing from this research that was being done was the fact that we could harvest the eggs from animals, from chickens that had layer hens that had been vaccinated with against certain targets, and how the immune system works is as a matter of fact, you probably again would know it from COVID, is that for an example, if you get sick with COVID, if you get infected with COVID, your immune system will produce antibodies against that infection, and therefore, eliminate the infection from your body. Alternatively, you could have a vaccine, and I'm not going to comment on whether the vaccine that was used for COVID worked or not, but the idea being that it was going to stimulate your immune system to produce antibodies that if you came in contact with COVID, you wouldn't get it, which that didn't seem to work very well, but that's another story. Anyway, in the case of a typical vaccination, especially when you're using the immune system of a laying hen, you can vaccinate that chicken against whatever target you want. And one of the problems in the baby pig industry is E. coli, and so we came up with the idea of vaccinating against E. coli, these chickens, laying hens, and then their immune system would then be stimulated to produce the antibodies against E. coli, which they deposit in their eggs. And that's a standard practice of all vertebrate animals, including humans. And it's the way that a mother hen would pass on immunity to her otherwise fertilized egg, and she doesn't know which egg is going to be fertilized or not. And so that egg would then have the antibodies against the E. coli that we'd been vaccinating against. And so that was our first one, and we started that working on research on that back in, like I say, 97. And then by 2007, we actually registered that product as what they call a veterinary biologic, which is an animal health drug that was registered with the Canadian Food Inspection Agency as a treatment against E. coli for baby pigs. And so that was, really the first of its kind in the world, where externally sourced antibodies that were also orally dosed could be used to treat infections in baby pigs. And so, that technology was pretty interesting. And so we we knew that antibody that we were producing was it was against what they call enterotoxigenic E. coli, and that's shortened to ETEC or ETEC. At ETEC, there's various different strains of ETEC E. coli, but they're all pretty close together. And one of the main causes of traveler's diarrhea, or Montezuma's revenge, is ETEC E. coli. And so, back, 15 years ago or so, we decided that, this antibody, it's sure we've been using it for baby pigs, but it's the same antibody that's causing, or the same antibody against the bacteria that causes traveler's diarrhea. And so we decided that we would, see about using it. And I had a bunch of friends that would, and it's just egg powder. That's really what it is when you come right down to it. From a safety issue, your negative side effects would be egg allergy. So, okay, don't take it if you've got an egg allergy. But anyway, so we had a bunch of friends who were going to, various, vacations in third world countries or less developed countries like, Mexico, and where the sanitation's not as good as probably here. And even traveling in general, you're just because it's new food items and things you're going to be taking, you tend to, get sick when you're away. But, and anyway, we had unbelievably great results. In other words, people would, all of a sudden get Montezuma's, and next thing you know, they'd take some of our stuff and they'd be better within an hour or two. And so, and that's really how we expected it would work. Because, with ETEC E. coli and Montezuma's, most of the time, nobody, they're not prescribing antibiotics to knock it out, because it's not a serious enough bacteria to be giving everybody who gets Montezuma's revenge antibiotic treatment, because you're going to get into what they call the antimicrobial resistance issue by using too much antibiotics. But anyway, your immune system typically can take care of the ETEC E. coli, but it takes 4 or 5 days, and that's 4 or 5 days that you're not spending on the beach and hanging around the bathroom instead. So anyway, we had some pretty good results in that regard, and we were really pretty confident that it would work. We already had all the evidence on the baby pig side, and let's face it, animal models are always used before human models, and we'd sort of passed that test, And anyway, so we then started thinking, okay, well, let's see if we can maybe market this. We didn't want to go through all the process of making claims, but we could say, for digestive health and things like that. And it is just a food. It's 100% whole egg powder. We mix it with a few other ingredients just to make it more manageable from the point of view of processing. We've now got it into a tablet form, which just to make it go through the tablet press, you had to put some other ingredients in, because egg is not very flowable, but or dried egg anyway. So anyway, we now have this product that we're thinking of selling, and so I don't know, probably about 6 or 7 years ago, I thought, well, if we're going to sell this product, I really should probably, once I've sold it to, people, I don't know what they're going to use it for. The indication that we were suggesting was, you get an upset stomach or whatever, you take the ImmunAde product and it'll knock it out, which, we were seeing it was doing. So anyway, I thought, well, just in case, who knows, there might be some side effects if you take it all the time. And I thought, well, okay, I'm going to do that. I'm going to take it every day. And back at that time, and I'll give you a little background on my health in general. I've been a pretty healthy guy for the most part. Had a bunch of surgeries with things like hernias and such, but otherwise, not sick very often. But one thing I did do is I played rugby, which I don't know if you're familiar with the game, but it's a contact sport, and I played at the highest level that we could play in Manitoba, which is still pretty good rugby, and it's still the same contact regardless of the capabilities of the players. But I played that for 39 consecutive years, and so I had lots of breaks and those types of things. And so as a matter of fact, if you can look at my fingers, that's a straight rugby figure, and same with over here. And, so those are the types of things, and my, ribs and things like that were broken. But I think I separated this shoulder 3 times, this one twice, and my knees were, messed up and everything else. And so I had arthritis, major arthritis pain. And I don't know if you're familiar with arthritis pain, but in my case, the pain was really, you just lived with it, but it was basically intolerable. So you're taking the Advils and things like that, which I really hate taking pain medications. And so anyway, so I'm living with this, and probably for about 10 years, you really couldn't even sleep. You're like, I get in bed and my knees would be aching, and I couldn't find a comfortable position. But anyway, regardless, so now I'm now trying the ImmunAde product, just to see if there's any negative side effects. And at the same time, my shoulder, that was about my range of motion for my right shoulder, and so I'd gotten myself an MRI on it, and after getting, because you need the MRI before you can go in to see the surgeon to see if they're going to do shoulder replacement or shoulder surgery. Anyway, so I started taking the ImmunAde antibodies just about the same time as I was having the MRI, and then about 3 or 4 weeks later, I've got to go in to see the surgeon. Anyway, when I had the MRI, excuse me, they called me back immediately, right away. Just the technicians, I guess, and they said, Mr. Hare, you've got severe osteoarthritis in that right shoulder. And I sort of knew that. I couldn't lift my arm up. And so anyway, so I kept taking my ImmunAde, and I wasn't looking for any relief from the arthritis, never even considered that. But, about 2 or 3 days before I had to go in and see the surgeon here in Winnipeg, and, he's got the MRI report in front of him, I woke up and realized that my arthritis pain was completely gone in all my joints, which, that was kind of strange. And so, right away I'm starting to think, well, what could have caused this? And so I'm now researching, or Googling, if you want to call it that, why there might be an association, because that's the only thing I changed. And, I had this problem with the arthritis for, like I said, at least 10 years. And so I found that there's a whole lot of research that's been done on what they call the gut microbiome and how it influences inflammation and inflammation throughout your body. And so I thought, well, okay, maybe there's something here. The fact that we've maybe reduced the inflammation in my gut, which has now, caused my inflammation in my shoulders and knees and such to go away. Anyway, I go in to see the surgeon, and he says, he's looking at my MRI and says, John, you've got severe osteoarthritis in your right shoulder. And at that time, no pain left. And I said, well, I don't think so. And so he sort of, well, I guess that's, you're not getting that surgery for sure. Anyway, so that sort of got us going. And so the next thing that we did is, we have a very small company. We have a lab that produces vaccines. And I mean, it's a very, technically all approved lab by, Canadian Food Inspection Agency, by Public Health Agency of Canada. And so, we have inspections. So, it's what they call clean rooms to produce, the vaccines for the E. coli we were producing. And by the way, now we have another one that we're producing, which we're into a phase 2 clinical trial on a thing called bacteria called C. difficile. And C. difficile is another gut bacteria infection that we have oral dose antibodies that we're now going through the phase 2 clinical trial to show that works to knock out the C. diff. Anyway, so in this small company, we've got 3 or 4 lab techs, and one of them had acid reflux, and it was really bad. And she was, basically she was looking for a benefits package through the company that would help pay for, the treatments that she had for that. And she also was severe asthmatic, but she was taking what they call a proton pump inhibitor, Nexium or omeprazole or something like that. Don't know exactly what drug she was on. That tells your stomach cells to stop producing acid, which, great, that stops producing the acid reflux. But at the same time, you need acid to digest food. And so it's not a great drug. As a matter of fact, I think on the boxes that I've looked at, they say don't take for more than 2 months. And I know people who've been on these PPIs for 20 years because they're so afraid of, if they go off, they're going to get the acid reflux again. And so anyway, the girl in our lab she's actually the one who makes the vaccine for the E. coli antibody. So I said, well, we can't afford to get a benefits plan here. But I said, why don't you try some of this ImmunAde? This is your benefits plan, and see if it works on the acid reflux. So anyway, yeah, she tried it, and about 3 or 4 weeks later, she came back and said, my acid reflux is gone. So I said to her, look, I don't know why we've seen that happen, but we know that the E. coli might be involved in causing problems with acid reflux and such, but just keep taking the antibody, because you never know. you don't want it to come back. And so, and one of the things about taking it, and what I've found, and the people who've done well with ImmunAde, is you really have to, it's a regimen you have to maintain. You can't, go on it and then go off of it, go on it, go off of it. It's and I'll tell you a little bit about why we think it's working the way it does, and why that the regular consumption of the antibody is necessary to get the kind of results we're seeing. But anyway, with the case of the girl in our lab who's making the E. coli vaccine, so she kept taking the ImmunAde antibody, and about 3 or 4 weeks later came back and said, John, my asthma's gone. And this was incredible, because she was severe asthmatic. She was probably 15 or more years really taking her, what they call rescue inhaler, like most people who are asthmatic would take their maintenance inhaler. In other words, she would spend 2 or 3 days a week in the hospital. In the evening, she'd go, because she couldn't breathe. Ambulance would take her to the hospital. She'd actually come from the hospital to work a lot of times. And so, but now she's completely clear of it. And we actually got her doctor finally to give us a letter that said he hasn't prescribed either the proton pump inhibitor for the acid reflux or the corticosteroids, which he was taking for treating or managing her asthma. So that's been, I think that letter is now 5 years old. But those are kind of things that, again, are inflammation related, which I think we've figured out how to eliminate. But anyway, so that's really where ImmunAde started from. And I've never really promoted it very hard. In other words, I've been a soft sell, and we make it, and it's, we've been concentrating primarily on the what do you call it, C. difficile, which is going through a legitimate, phase 2 clinical trials, by, that are approved by Health Canada, which will eventually become a drug that we can actually make claims on. And so with the ImmunAde, we're basically saying healthy longevity. So in other words, I'm 72 right now, and, shooting for, I'm going to say 120. And people say, well, you can't, how are you going to hit 120? Well, and one thing that's interesting about the healthy longevity, and there's all kinds of talk on, longevity drugs and things like that, supplements that are going to help you live longer and such. But nobody, if you think about it, doing longevity trials is pretty hard, because, basically the researcher has to follow the person who's taking whatever treatment they're taking all the way until they die. Could be a long trial. Matter of fact, the researcher's got to live as long as the person taking the actual treatment. So there really isn't any evidence, data evidence, that can show that that basically these so-called longevity treatments or supplements or whatever are actually going to work. And so, but in our case, we actually have one case of a person who, for about 100 years, took a facsimile of ImmunAde. Basically, it was, the natural immunity from eggs that she took. And as a matter of fact, she eventually became the world's oldest person, died in 2017 at the age of 117 and 137 days when she was a teenager, which, you think back, that would have been 1915 or so, because she was the last person born in the 18th century. And so I think it was, late November in 1899. Anyway, so when she was a teenager, she had anemia. And the doctor, I don't know why, but I guess he suggested she take a couple of raw eggs every day to get rid of the anemia. I don't think he knew that she was going to take it every single day for the rest of her life. And again, taking it every, the consistency of taking it was a thing. And I'm not suggesting you go run off and start taking raw eggs, but the one thing about the ImmunAde, it is raw eggs, but it's pasteurized, spray dried, and put into a form that's a whole lot better than taking, untested or unpasteurized raw egg. But anyway, so she took this every day, and when they finally asked her at about 115 years old, when she was already the world's oldest person, what do you attribute your longevity to? And she said, well, I divorced my husband at 38 and never remarried, and everybody's laughing about that, thinking that's probably a good reason. But really, I hit on the egg thing, because that's what she said. She said the other thing, she told the story about the anemia and been taking these antibodies that were in raw eggs. And by the way, raw eggs only, because when you cook an egg, you denature those antibodies. And so even in our case, when we produce the actual product, the temperatures that we process are very, very important as to how we get the antibodies that we want. So anyway, so she ended up being world's oldest person. And so now we're advertising ImmunAde as a longevity treatment. And so, but en route to getting to be 120, which is what I'm shooting for, watch out for these side effects. And side effects typically are negative. So what I'm saying is, because we don't want to make claims, and we can't because we can't afford to go through all the clinical trials that would be required to show that these things actually happen. But while you're taking ImmunAde every day to get to be, my timer's up, while you're getting to be, 120, watch out for these side effects, which would include the elimination of certain chronic illnesses. And, I look at chronic illnesses, and chronic illnesses typically are things you're not born with and are not contagious. And so you say, how did you get them? And that's where we were talking about gut microbiome. Almost all of these chronic illnesses are associated with probably what they call a dysbiosis, or unbalanced of the good and bad bugs in your gut. And by us adding that extra antibodies every day, we are helping your natural immune system to keep those bugs in check, and therefore, prevent getting some of these infections or these chronic illnesses, but at the same time, potentially reversing some, which is what we've seen in many, many cases. And so anyway, I've never really, like I said, tried to go out and promote ImmunAde on a hard push basis. I'm now confident after taking it myself every day for, I guess we're up to 7 years now. I'm still kicking, and obviously you've got to do other things to help maintain your longevity as well. But your gut is something you really can't do much about. You can do the exercise, like I'm sitting on the Peloton as we speak. Do that 3 or 4 times a week for sure. Get some exercise, eat healthy. There's no question. You need fiber. You need those types of things. But at the same time, your immune system has a limited capacity. And especially as you age, that capacity diminishes. And we've seen that even with the COVID. They always were so worried about the older people, with how they're going to perform against COVID. And that was natural because, the immune response from an older person, just like running a 100-yard dash, is going to be less capable than if you were a younger person. And so, not in all cases, but, for the most part. And so what ImmunAde does is it actually gives you a daily serving, and it has to, the reason for doing it daily is there's no residual benefit to ImmunAde. You take these, the antibodies in, they go into your system, they do what they're supposed to do in your gut. By the way, your gut is where 75% of your total immune capacity is. So we're just adding more, immune capacity right there. And, we're seeing the results, with some of these chronic illnesses, and better yet, with somebody that could live to be 117 and 137 days. And by the way, her name was Emma Morano from Italy, if you wanted to check her out. But anyway, John here, I'm shooting for 120. I've got another 48 years to go, which I'm looking forward to. And, ImmunAde is going to be, something that people are going to say, well, that's relatively expensive. And I think, well, if you can get rid of your arthritis pain, which I did, I would have paid any amount of money to do that. And so, the ImmunAde, we say it's probably going to cost you $60 a month or $70 a month, but on a continual basis. So it does add up to some money. But, if it gives you the kind of results that we've seen with people, myself included, small price to pay. And if we can go healthy to a long age, that's another benefit. Anyway, check out immunade.com, and that's IMMUNADE.com. And, have a look at some of the testimonials. And by the way, some of the things I've talked about in this video are on that website as far as testimonials go. And give it a try, but the one thing I will stress, you might think it's somewhat expensive. You've got to take it continually. I take 10 in the morning and 10 in the evening. People think, 10 of anything, that's a lot. Well, these are like candies. I sort of, equate them to, say, Skittles. 10 are little, they're like lozenges, but you can chew them up or swallow them down with water. They taste good. They've got dextrose, which is a high energy monosaccharide sugar. And then it's egg, and that's what it is. And the egg itself is highly nutritious, the highest biological value of natural food protein you can get. So there's all kinds of other benefits to it as well. But the nice thing is eliminating, some of these chronic illnesses that, again, we're not born with. And it's called, we basically call it a microbiome therapy, because you're taking these antibodies every day, and you're knocking down the bad bug overgrowth. At least you're helping your own immune to keep that bad bug overgrowth in check. So anyway, we're up to now about 25 minutes. I'm starting to sweat pretty good on this bike, and it's a good way for me to get a little bit of exercise and to do a little video at the same time. Anyway, John here signing off. Please have a look at immunade.com and become a user and live to be 120 with me.